Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I actually had a chance to do a bit of watercolor painting. I haven't really done or haven't used this medium very much for, well, the last 12 months or so. So this video I wanted, for what it's worth, just to talk through some of my ideas about watercolor painting. So to try and give the video a bit more structure and not just the usual me rambling off at tangents, I decided the way I'd do it is I would look for some other people's ideas on watercolor painting, and then I would say whether or not I agree with their ideas, why I agree or disagree, and so on, and just try to build up some idea of my ideas about watercolor painting. And that's all it is. It's just my opinions, my ideas. Different people have, equally valid but completely different ideas. Okay, so I typed into Google something like, what is the best way to use watercolor paint, or something like that. As usual, came back with lots and lots of results. I picked a blog article from sort of the top part of the search results. This blog article was called The 3 Rules of Watercolor Painting, or something like that. So let me just start off saying that I don't think they're really rules. I'm not convinced that there are any such thing as rules in art. There are certainly circumstances where, it's probably better to use a certain medium in a certain way, and there's some things that work well with certain media and so on and so on. But the idea of rules, I find it very restrictive, and that's my main problem with this concept of rules. I think artists should be free to do their own thing, and if you're too worried about rules or the right way to do things, then that can limit your creativity, which I think is a bad thing. But anyway, getting back to this article, the first rule that they give is always work from light to dark. I agree with this partly. It depends on your style of using watercolor paint. For me, it's not that I disagree with the rule, it's just it's not applicable really to me because I have a different way of painting. If you use the layer method of watercolor painting, then this is probably a good recommendation to follow. And it's just logical. It's a lot of watercolor paint. I should say, first of all, the layer method of using watercolors. So if you're not familiar with this, just type into YouTube or something like painting with watercolors in layers or something like that, and you'll see people using this method. It's very common. Usually what they'll do is they'll put down some colors, lighter colors, in a somewhat abstract way, and then they'll give their painting more structure by adding in darker values on top of that. Once it's dried, they let the first layer dry, and then they go in and put darker values on top of it. It is one way of using watercolor paint, and it's quite a common way of doing it, but it is not the only way of using watercolor paint. And the way I do it is very different. I paint wet in wet, and I do the entire painting in one sitting. So I don't wait for anything to dry. The whole painting is done quite quickly. So for me, it's not I disagree with this rule, it's just not applicable to me. It is applicable in the layer method of painting because a lot of the lighter colors are quite transparent in watercolor. So if you try to put down a lighter, somewhat transparent color on top of a darker value, you won't see the lighter paint. So that's why they have this recommendation, this rule, always paint light to dark. The second rule they give in this article was don't use too much water. Now in this case I do just have to disagree with this, mainly because I don't know what it means. What is too much water? It's like, how long is a piece of string? I don't know. But certainly water is essential, and it's not just important, it's essential to watercolor painting. It's in the name of the medium, so it has to be important. In fact, if I was going to give my 4 most important things in watercolor painting, number 1, most important, would be water, H2O. Number 2 would be paper. Number 3, paint. And number 4, the brush that you use, or brushes. With water, learning how to control the amount of water that's on the paper, the ratio of water to pigment in your brush, learning to control these things will help you to have more control over watercolor, and therefore, if you're in control, you have a better chance of creating the sort of paintings that you want to create. With paper, the main thing is the surface texture of the paper. So is it rough, smooth, something in between? That surface texture will have a huge impact on how the paint and the water interact with the paper itself, which in turn will affect how your final painting looks. So the surface texture that you use is an integral part of the sort of style, your painting style. Also with paper, if you want to do like I do, painting wet in wet, you need a watercolor paper that's been sized. So a lot of multimedia paper, drawing paper and things, they haven't been sized. What that means is when you put the water and pigment onto the paper, it immediately starts to sink into the paper, into the fibers of the paper. And for wet in wet painting, that's very bad. You want the water and the pigment to sit on the surface of the paper for a little bit and to slowly sink in so that you have a chance to work with it. That's what wet in wet painting is. The paint itself is important. In general, it's not always true, but in general, more expensive paints have more pigment and higher quality pigment, and therefore you get more vibrant colors. Cheaper paints are more difficult to work with because you won't get those vibrant colors usually. The 4th thing then was the brush. I just keep things simple. I use one brush. These days I use a synthetic hairbrush, but different people, different ideas about brushes. In terms of the size of brush, it's applicable, or it should be applicable to the size of the paper, the size of the painting that you're doing. Bigger paintings, bigger paper, you need bigger brushes. That's as simple as that, really. Getting back to those 3 rules, the 3rd one was, they said, don't use every color in your color palette. This time I do agree with them. Again, I wouldn't say it's a rule, but certainly as a recommendation, I think there's a lot of merit in this idea, especially when it comes to composition and harmony. The more colors that you use in your painting, the higher chance you have of colors clashing. Some colors will clash, some colors work better together. Reducing the number of colors that you use, in general, not always, but in general, can improve the harmony. It reduces the amount of clashing. And sometimes that's a good thing. Again, it depends on your style of painting and what you're trying to achieve. You see me doing this painting, I'm basically using blue and yellow. That's it. You'll get some greens forming where the blue and yellow start to mix on the paper. That's fine. But basically, I'm using blue and yellow. That's it. So it's a very limited palette. Okay, so quite a quick video this week, but those are, for what they're worth, those are some of my ideas about watercolor painting. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.